Well, hi there, it's Paulie here with good old Mr. Snoots, and I'm here to share some more transgender history. Now, were you aware that we have our own saint? This is a saint both in the Greek and Russian Orthodox and Catholic canon. Saint Anastasia the Patrician. This is a Byzantine saint. I'll tell you a few stories about saints later on. This is an interesting one. Now, This is a person who was born female and who lived most of their life in the gender of a man. As I've said before, many transmasculine identities in particular have been done what you would call procedurally. They have been done to achieve an aim or goal. These are often people who have temporarily taken on a male gender presentation in order to do something. Find a husband that has been press ganged or dragged into the army. Fight in a war where women weren't allowed to fight in the front lines. I'll go over some American Civil War examples. And many a time these individuals achieve their goal and return to being female presentation. But there are some that continue till the day they die, and they're an interesting case. Anastasia the Patrician. Right, one of my favourite historical periods is through the early Byzantine Empire. I love that period. As a wargamer, when I first opened at the age of 12, that wonderful Airfix Guide to Ancient Wargaming, there's all these pictures of people's Byzantine armies. And I had been to Istanbul and to Turkey as a kid and had wandered a lot of Byzantine ruins. And this really brought it to life for me. Standing in Hagia Sophia and so on were and are memories I'll carry with me forever, even if I can't go back to these places because trans. But that 6th century period, the 500s, is fascinating. So, you might want to read up on this yourself. There was Emperor Justinian. Now, Justinian was not particularly well educated. He had been the nephew of Roman Emperor. Justinian was a soldier, very popular with the army. I believe he's from up north, so he had a bad accent. He wasn't particularly literate, but he was fairly intelligent and well positioned and ambitious. When his uncle died, Justinian inherited the throne, and he took up with Empress Theodora, who has entire videos on her own. Empress Theodora was an actress, which is synonymous with prostitute, from the theatre at the time. Very famous for doing an animal double act. Her leader in the Swan, she would cover herself with, get naked, cover herself with corn kernels and have a swan peck them off her on stage. Apparently this act caught the eye of Justinian, and he married her. And it was, in many ways, the best thing he ever did, because she was an absolute genius. She was an incredibly intelligent woman. However, she was also vindictive, bitter, and cruel. Anyone, because she'd lived in such poverty and had had to sell herself in order to survive, and had been, picked on and bullied and brutalized, she took, early medieval vengeance upon those who had crossed her and her family. Score! But one of her ladies in waiting was Anastasia, and Anastasia, she actually came from Alexandria, which is in Egypt, which was in very close contact with Constantinople at the time. It was like the other capital of the empire. Constant traffic back and forth. It was a bit of a troublesome province, I have to say, because there was still a lot of argument about what Christianity is at the time. The Nicene Creed and so on comes pretty much, in at about this time, but there's still major sects which really don't agree on some basics. Alexandria was a big place for that. That was where the Monophysites used to particularly hang out. Anastasia was from a Monophysite family, and the Empress was a Monophysite. This is a particular sect. So that explains why she is a lady in waiting. She was obviously highly intelligent. We're told she was incredibly courtly. She was very courteous and well-read. Highly, highly, highly intelligent is the record that's been left behind of Anastasia. But Justinian... Now, it's not that he had an eye for the ladies so much, although he may well have. But it looks like Theodora entirely satisfied any sexual needs he could have had. They actually seem to have been a very tight, very passionate couple. But he was aware of his lack of education, and he was aware of his lack of, higher intelligent insights. So he did like to collect very intelligent people around him as advisors. And he leaned into Anastasia as an advisor to an extent where it provoked the jealousy of Empress Theodora. Empress Theodora, famed for burying people alive or finding her rivals and, cutting various bits off them and, throwing them to the sharks, was not really someone that you wanted being jealous of you. And also, I think Anastasia was very disturbed at this change in relationship. So disturbed by it that she fled. Not entirely fleeing just from Theodora, fleeing from the emperor as well. But went to Alexandria and founded a monastery. Now, at this stage, monasteries, some are one gender only, male or female. That's extremely common. There were some bi-gendered ones where there'd be male and female communities sometimes sharing a central chapel and so forth. It was a very early time for these religious communities. They were very passionate, they were very dedicated, and they were crazy. They were much into mortification of the flesh and solitude and so forth. But she founded a monastery, which was the monastery of Alexandria the Wise. Anastasia the Wise. If you're trying to hide from someone, starting a major institution with your name on it is probably not your best move. Okay, Theodora, as you can tell, I bloody love her. Tragically, she died of throat cancer. And this left Justinian devastated. She really had been his world. So he decided to immediately turn and reach out and bring Anastasia back. And he was offering marriage. He was offering to make this woman empress. She had obviously very devoutly gone into religious life and absolutely did not want to return to court life. So she essentially pulled the disappearing act. She disappeared. She got a boat and a couple of belongings, and she pissed off. She went to a very, very, very obscure monastic community in the desert, which was run by a senior monk. There's not even really a formal structure to many of these, but the abbot was Daniel. And this was these communities. There is often a centralized community of monks, but they'll often have cells, or caves that they live in, which are just scattered about an area. There's often not like a formal building like a medieval monastery. This will be an area where there are religious hermits clustered in an area, and there may be some buildings and so on in the middle where some monks take care of the hermits. The hermits are almost like are heavenly layer above ordinary monks. These are people who are living in absolute solitude for the goodness of their souls. The abbot made sure that the younger monks every week took out a wine jar, which is a huge jar, of water out to the cave where what the abbot described as a eunuch monk was living. And this was an Anthony. But this was actually our Anastasia living in a male guise as a religious hermit. So their only real human contact was the young monk turning up once a week. They didn't really speak to this visitor, but would leave messages on potsherds out the front of the cave if further communication was wanted. There was a little wheat field that these hermits could use. So they would cut their own grain, grind their own grain. There were olive trees. There were some fruit trees. So these hermits basically looked after their own food, but because it was a desert area, water is brought. And for the next 28 years, that is how Anastasia lived. One day, 28 years later, the young monk turned up to deliver water and found a potsherd. And this potsherd basically said, "The Lord has revealed to me the day of my death. Please return and bring shovels." So the kid ran off and got Daniel. And there are preserved writings from Abbot Daniel. There is an implication here that Daniel, in fact, may have known Anastasia very well, because knew Anastasia's background. They'd obviously conversed a lot, and obviously actually this Daniel had a huge love and fondness for this strange eunuch monk. They turned up and they found Anastasia had a raging fever, was very old, and there was nothing they could do. But they asked, "What can we do for you?" And all Anastasia said is, "Just bury me as I am. Don't take my clothes off or anything. Just bury me as I am." We've heard that before, haven't we? Now, and they asked for blessings from her because she was seen as such a holy figure, had lived in such solitary hermetic sanctity, but clearly actually had a reputation for wisdom. And so she actually gave a prayer, particularly for the young monk, giving a blessing, basically asking Christ to guide over him. He who has brought God knows how many thousands of steps this young man has taken bringing these things to me each week. So let him guide and care for your steps for the rest of your life. And then she turned her face to the east and looked. Suddenly a look of radiance and gladness came over her, and she said, "You've come. Let us go together." Sorry. And she died. Daniel asked the young monk to help lay her out. They dug a grave. And all Anastasia was wearing really was a homemade palm fibre loincloth, and a single garment, basically. It's basically a blanket that you just wrap around yourself. The abbot had like a hooded robe as well. He handed this to the young monk and said, "Let her go with more clothing than she has now. Wrap her, please, in all of my outer garments as well." Which is a huge gift, because that's everything this monk owns. As he was doing this, the young monk realised Anastasia was female, just as he's like folding and arranging things. He didn't say anything really, and Daniel was sorely grieved. So they wept together over her, and then they buried her. And they found she had actually left food out for them, knowing that she was dying. She had left a meal out for the people that were going to bury her. So they sort of had this almost, well, they had a wake, essentially, at her graveside. They stayed there for a day and a night, praying for her, eating the food that she had left for them. And she had a rope that she had made. She'd just been hand weaving a rope. Now, this may have actually been like a tool that she's giving back to the monastery, but it is also quite likely to be effectively a rosary, a hand-woven cord knotted, which represents days of prayer in a calendar. So it may have been essentially a calendar rosary. But they took this, seeing it as extremely precious. And the young monk finally asked Daniel, were you aware that Anastasia was a woman? And he said, yes, I always have been. And he told the young monk the tale that this person had been a very high lady, born into the highest level of the court, had voluntarily abandoned it for a religious life, but when offered a return to the pinnacle of the empire and the height of all wealth and glory, had rejected it and instead embraced the humble life of a hermit in a cave, living off grain they cut with their own hands and ground in their own kern, and just there, 1 jar of water a week. And so this was seen essentially as the absolute pinnacle of rejection of wealth and the corruption that it brings, power and the corruption that it brings, to embrace the sacred. Later on, that young monk and Daniel, when the sick came to the monastery and so on, looking for places of pilgrimage, holy places on the local route, prayers in the name of Anastasia apparently, provided healing miracles and so on. So therefore, Anastasia, the Patrician, was declared to be a saint, was kind of rehabilitated into their female guise, and that is how they now exist in the canon for Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, and the Catholic Church. There are numerous hymns, 6th century hymns written by Daniel, which remain in the canon. What have they got here? Hang on, I'll find it for you. Yeah, let's see. There are actually hymns to Anastasia. These are like from the Dark Ages. They've survived. What is this one? Let's see this one. Here's one by Saint Nikolai Veliomarich. I probably massacred that name. One time a glorious patrician, venerable Anastasia, money, flattery abandoned she all, to Christ her entire life she directed, Christ her bread, Christ her water, Christ her joy and freedom, Christ the restorer of her soul, Christ the bridge over death. She forgave all that she loved, and for the entire world she prayed. Like an angel she was indeed, wholly fixed upon Christ. By the power of God more powerful was she than riches and the wealthy, than the Empress Theodora amidst the opulence of the imperial court. So yeah, Anastasia the Patrician is a saint that actually has been pretty actively adopted as a transgender saint by the Greek and Russian Orthodox communities in particular, and by parts of the Catholic community. As a historian, I must say I am not sure that Anastasia conceived of herself entirely as male, or whether she adopted a male persona as a way of completely shearing herself away from that other life. First, as a means of escaping the power of the emperor to find her, although Justinian didn't last that long. He died 20 years before she did. So continued to embrace that life. Some of the hymns and some of the records of Daniel say that Saint Anastasia's sanctity was such that it transcended male and female gender, transcended the temporary housing of their soul, and instead showed that the spirit is all. So this is actually in many ways an early piece of church law saying essentially that gender almost doesn't matter. What matters is the soul, the spirit, which is a bit of an interesting piece of work. Anyway, we have our own saint. You can look her up. There are icons and so on you can get. And if you do see, there are some Greek transgender communities, Greek Orthodox ones, you will find like Anastasists is often a little way of referring to transgender community and followers. Byzantine Emperor Justinian, Theodora, this was a very interesting time. This is a formative time for Christianity. It's a formative time for civilization. The early medieval period is where the great, and face it, repressive monotheisms are trying to work out their roots. So at the very root, the genesis of organized Christianity, here is someone raised to sainthood who definitely swapped genders. Interesting. All right, so I'll leave you good folk with that. By the way, you can see the effects HRT have. I'm crying at someone's last moments from 560. Oh well. I do that now. Look after yourselves. Mr. Snoots and I are still combing through all kinds of histories for everybody. There are some interesting ones out there. Remember, we have always been here and we always will. But be very careful when going through histories not to appropriate things and just say that someone is transgender. In many ways, we do not know how historical or prehistorical figures honestly viewed themselves in the world, and the right wing lies to support its positions. It is its essence. The right wing's beliefs are based upon lies. Let us never base our own upon falsehoods. If you see a historical figure and claim they're trans and they're not, you are still building something on a lie. For one thing, that makes your position into a bit of a house of cards. But for another thing, a lie always takes something from someone. And even if that someone died in the 560s, they still deserve our respect for who they thought they were. Anastasia the Patrician is an admirable figure because she managed to turn her back on the absolute pinnacle of wealth and power available on earth at her time, and turn away from it and live a life of religious solitude. That's not a life that would be attractive to you or I, but in the context of the time, it is the very height of humble virtue. So her beliefs were very sincere, and she lived those beliefs to the very last second of her life. So much respect to her. And much love to all of you. Look after yourselves. Places like the UK have descended into a true hellhole at the moment. All I can tell you there is be very, very visible and be magnificent and be proud. Be proud of who you are, because you're living unabashedly in truth, just like the truth of the histories that we share. I'll catch you later on.